And so, as a third generation fighter ace, yeah, I have to talk about the Red Baron for a minute. Here he is. He was chosen by Oswald Bilka to be in Bilka's fighter squadron, and I think this is a great photo of him. On the right-hand side, this is all of his medals after he was killed. This is a representation of the medals he had won by the time he died. So, and someone mentioned to him once that he was a hero, and he said, no. He says, I am just a combat pilot. Now, Bilka, he was a hero. So now that here, the fourth generation aircraft that saw the front, there's a pretty good variety of those. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Now the tactics are primarily squadrons working together. The French now form the first fighter groups, which is grouping 3 or 4 squadrons together as a fighter wing. The unit leaders now continuously train their men in unit tactics. The lone wolf fighter pilots are no longer common. They've either learned to be part of a fighter squadron, or they were killed because their luck ran out. The lone hunter is was being shot down by a pack, a squadron of enemies. And probably the first fourth generation fighter to reach the front is the SPAD-7. And here's a nice example. It's been preserved in the museum. And it had the Hispano-Suiza V8 engine, which was a very advanced engine at the time. I also call the Sopwith Camel a fourth generation aircraft. There have been people who have asked, well, why did they call it a Camel? And it looks like, if I can, okay. I put a picture of the front of the aircraft there with the 2 guns, and you see kind of a hump over the guns where the guns were covered by a metal fairing, and apparently the hump over the guns gave them the idea of the hump for the camel. That's how it got its name. Anyway, this is a reproduction. It's one of the more famous aircraft of the war, one of the more effective aircraft of the war. And its contemporary, which came out a few months later, is the Fokker triplane. This was in direct response, you saw, to the earlier Sopwith triplane. But the structures of the aircraft and the aerodynamics were very, very different. This was the first aircraft to use the Fokker's thick airfoil. Basically, these wings did not need the bracing strut between them, but they put it in there to make the pilots feel more comfortable. It did reduce the wingtip vibration in flight, but here the wing design, the structure, and the aerodynamics was a major advance, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. And now you see 2-seat fighter planes coming to the fore in both Germany and England. Some more fourth generation fighters and fourth generation fighter ace. So here's Werner Voss in his prototype Fokker triplane, and he was a friend of the Red Baron and a friendly rival, and he was shot down in probably the world's most famous dogfight in September of 1917, when he took on an entire flight of 56 Squadron, Royal Flying Corps, by himself essentially, and fought them to a standstill for 8 to 10 minutes, which is eternity in a dogfight, before they finally killed him. And he damaged every single one of their aircraft. And when he was killed, he had 48 victories. He had the Portland Marines. He was a squadron commander, and he was 20 years old. And here's another fourth generation fighter ace. This is Willy Coppens. He was the leading Belgian ace of the war. Here he is with his Hanriot HD-1. And he was the war's leading balloon buster. He scored 37 victories, 35 of which were balloons. And he has some very hair-raising stories about actually landing on a balloon that he was attacking when he had a problem with his engine. And then he shut his engine off, to keep the propeller from cutting the balloon fabric. And he let his plane roll off the balloon, regained flying speed, and got out of there. I mean, that's just what he said, you know. So then we get to the 5th generation fighters, and here I'm talking about fighters with either advanced airframes or advanced engines. And for the Allies, it was primarily advanced engines. It was either the more advanced Hispano-Suiza V8s or the V12s from Rolls-Royce. For the Germans, it was primarily the Fokkers with their thick cantilever wings. Again, we're going now to squadron and group level, and the lone wolf fighter pilot is very, very uncommon. The Bristol fighter with the Rolls-Royce V12 is in that. The SC-5A with the Hispano-Suiza. The SPAB-13, one of the most famous aircraft in the war. This is at the Air Force Museum, and this one is painted to look like that, flown by Eddie Rickenbacker. The Fokker D7, probably one of the most famous planes of the war, and the one I would personally want to fly if I had to go back there and do this. The wing made this airplane. It had a very high angle of attack. It gave it a very gentle stall. It flew like a light plane we would know it today. And other Fokkers were the D6, which was the rotary engine version of that, and the D8, which was a parasol monoplane version of that, again with that great wooden cantilever wing. And some Sopwiths that were advanced, and the Siemens Sugar Works D3 and D4 with their advanced counter-rotary engine. And here's a 5th generation fighter ace. This is the leading Italian ace of the war, Francesco Baracca. You see on the right him standing by his SPAB-13. And if you notice his insignia, that may look a little familiar, because after World War I was over, a young Italian racing driver named Enzo Ferrari talked to Baracca's mother, because Baracca was killed in action, and she gave Enzo Ferrari permission to use Baracca's personal prancing horse insignia, his rampant stallion insignia, to Enzo Ferrari for his race cars. And you may have seen one of those or two of those around today with that insignia. So that insignia lives on. Here's Eddie Rickenbacker, the leading American ace of World War I, with his original SPAD. You saw a reproduction a few minutes ago. And finally we get to the 6th generation fighters, and these are the ones with all metal airframes, and there are only a couple of those. First is the Junkers. Junkers used the thick airfoil. Notice that the corrugations on this airplane is like a corrugated tin roof. Those corrugations are there to stiffen the aircraft, the skin, to keep it from buckling. And this was entering service at the very end of the war. And here's one of my very favorites. This is the Zeppelin D1. And I know everyone thinks of airships when they think of Zeppelin, but Zeppelin built other things as well. And they had their own airframe or aircraft manufacturing. And this aircraft used all metal stressed skin construction, the same type of technology that was used up into the 1960s and 70s. So this aircraft, even though it was experimental, also had the most advanced airframe of the war. Now, for those of you who have seen the movie or read the book, The Blue Max, anybody out there? If you remember in the plot, Stockel was killed testing an experimental aircraft. Well, the idea for that came because a leading ace, Reinhardt, who took over the Red Baron's flying circus after he was killed, was flying one of these under test conditions, and the top wing tore off, and he was killed. And that's the actual truth behind that plot element in the Blue Max.